Welcome to this first webinar and that we're doing, the Waterway webinar. As many of you have seen, we're going to run a series of these, and I think it's really important, particularly at this time where we're not able to get out, that we continue to cover the activities that are happening around the IWA scene and beyond. So what I'm going to do initially is I'm going to share my screen, and then I'm going to run through my presentation over the next 25 minutes or so. And then we're going to open things up for Q&A. So I will just share my screen now. So you should be able to see my opening slide, IWA, past, present, and future. And the main focus of tonight is IWA more relevant, or just as relevant now as it's ever been. So before I start to get into my presentation proper, I thought I'd just introduce myself in a little bit more detail. This is kind of me in my normal everyday work world. I'm a husband. My wife Amanda is actually isolating, quite ill at the moment with coronavirus, but recovering quite well. I'm a father, I'm a company director. I spend a lot of my time, as the image conveys, is in public speaking, and I'm often speaking at large events. I've got a lot of different likes. I enjoy my beer, normally when I'm on a word camp, but I'm also known for my love of whiskey as well. I don't own a boat, but I hire together with Amanda fairly regularly, and most recently I love the outdoor life, and so we've taken on an allotment. So that's a little bit about me, and I've been involved as a volunteer with IWA for the last almost 6 years. What really motivates me is to make a difference, and that's what really gets me out of bed in the morning, and I think I find a great outlet for that in IWA. My main focus is about the effect that we can make, not just about the effort, because a lot of people are running around very busy, but they're not making much effect, and I'll touch on some of that a little bit later. I think in terms of making the right effect and having the right effect, it's about the right tools, being well planned, being safe and secure, working as a team, and being able to mentor others. It's actually something that in my very early days in WERG, I learned the value of that. So just to take you back to where it all started, actually this is where my life in IWA started. And actually, this is a little bit prior to me, not in 2010, but I wanted to show you where it started, and that is at Inglesham Lock, at the head of the Thames and the eastern end of the Severn Thames Canal. Actually, when it started was on a canal camp in 2014, when my wife rather grandly offered me a all-expenses, all-inclusive holiday on a WERG camp. And so you can see that the Inglesham Lock was in a relative state of disrepair, but actually it had come a long way even since 2010. But we completed it in September 2019. And for me, when I talk about why is IWA relevant, and just as relevant today as it's always been, I learned here that a bunch of people coming together, many of whom had never seen each other and known each other before, could really make a difference. And I think that's first and foremost why IWA remains as relevant today as it ever has. We work very well as a team. One of the things I think it's really important to recognize, though, is that the only time you can be truly relevant is now. Now, many people will say, we've been relevant for the last 75 years of IWA. And yes, that is true. We were relevant for those periods that we went through back in the early days, in the very activist times in the 50s and 60s, the times when we really built on our restoration heritage and drove things through in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and everything we have done over the whole of that 75 years. But in terms of being truly relevant, we need to think about how we're relevant now. And in preparing this presentation, I thought it was worthwhile looking specifically at what relevant means. And a couple of definitions that particularly struck me were, it's about being closely connected or appropriate to what is being done or considered, and appropriate to the current time, period, or circumstances, or being of contemporary interest. So we can see that being relevant in the past doesn't necessarily make us relevant for today, and certainly cast doubt on how relevant you can be in the future. So I'm keen to talk a little bit about that and where I feel that our relevance comes for both today and how we continue to be relevant going forward in the future. To be truly relevant, to be relevant today and to make sure you're relevant tomorrow really requires responsiveness. Because in those early days of the IWA, it was clear that the waterways were changing in their use and moving to more leisure use, moving potentially away from the dominance of freight in, across the waterways. And so something quite clearly had to be done. And our founders recognized that, and they were responsive to change. That is the essence of IWA, I believe, is being responsive to change, knowing what you need to do at each stage that we go through in our history. And I believe we've done that, and we must continue to do that. Now, people often talk to me about, well, if we need to be responsive, that means change. Now, I understand that a lot of people get fairly nervous about change. And I think we don't need to worry about that, I believe, because actually any change that we need to establish can be based on the founding principles of IWA, namely to be an association to campaign for the regeneration of the waterways. What was true back in the 40s is true today. I believe that we don't need to change anything about those 4 words, and I believe those 4 words are very important in terms of how we drive our future. And actually, as I've spoken at branch meetings recently, whether physical meetings at Leicestershire branch or Northampton branch or Oxfordshire branch recently, or in online meetings at Chiltern branch and the Guildford and Reading branch over the last couple of weeks, and in the meetings that I'm sure that we'll have over the coming months, I've spoken about these 4 words. And actually, I make no apologies, even to those of you who heard me speak and use these terms at those meetings, because I believe it warrants repetition to the point where we really do believe that how we were established can help point the way for the changes we need to make in future. So I want to look at each of these 4 words separately, just briefly. So for me, association means being engaging and welcoming. And I think in many areas of IWA, we do that. And we've demonstrated that even over the last couple of weeks. And I believe that it's never more true than it is today, that we need to be engaging and welcoming, recognizing that actually we are a family of people who have a common passion to see the waterways offer the very best they can to all users. But we need to be participative as well. For many of us, our passion means that we do get out and we try to deliver as much as we possibly can out around the waterways. Now, of course, that's being curtailed at the moment, but the work of IWA does not end because we can't get out. There are so many activities, and I joined the staff team Zoom call this morning, and we were talking about how we refocus priorities and how we engage the wider staff team, volunteers, and members into continuing our work, even as it changes in this difficult period. For me, it's about building relationships and connections and recognizing that we are a community for all users, where we can develop common themes, no matter where we are in the country, no matter what our own passions and interests are. I also want to look at what it means to campaign, because again, that was one of our founding principles. I do believe to some extent that perhaps we've lost some of the activism of IWA in the early years, and we still, I believe, campaign very effectively. And we've seen very clear demonstration of that over many years, and particularly in some of the reports and some of the lobbying that we've been able to do in recent years. We are promoting change, and we're seeing that change. We're seeing the effects of that promotion of change. We're able to do it on a local, regional, national level. We can cover all things. We can pick up on almost any issue to campaign on, whether it's environmental issues, which are obviously very topical today, but as I'll talk about later, heritage, planning, society, and many, many other things where the waterways will always have an enduring relevance. I also want to talk about this term regeneration, and it will come up again later. For me, regeneration in the early days very clearly meant restoration, ensuring that waterways didn't fall into dereliction. But I also think that we need to look at that term regeneration in its widest sense. Not that I'm denying or moving the agenda, suggesting the agenda moves on from restoration. Far from it. I don't think any of us that are involved in IWA today will see a day where restoration isn't important. But I think we also need to look at how we protect our heritage and engage in planning policy, and how as IWA, that we don't necessarily have to take a stance on every single thing, but we can coordinate the diverse interests that are around. And IWA, I think, is uniquely placed to be able to create that platform for those discussions and the negotiations around coordinating those diverse interests. But just as our founders were looking forward and evaluating the future use and predicting future risk in the waterways, so must we, if we're only looking back to see what has historically been the issues for the waterways, we'll lose sight of our purpose for the future. And I believe at that point, we will very dramatically reduce our ability to be relevant. And of course, we were focused, and we are focused on the waterways. And we need to make sure that we maintain a very broad definition of what the waterways are and how they are interpreted. Our navigable rivers are just as important as our canals, and we need to make sure that we hold on to both of those key definitions as we interpret our role in and around the waterways. And I believe we're doing that, and we're ensuring that we remain as relevant today as we have done in the past by keeping that broader perspective. This third bullet of towpaths has been on this slide deck, and I've talked in my interviews with Waterways magazine and with Canal Boat magazine and other waterways press, and I've used the term towpaths as another area that defines, in my mind, the waterways. And I believe we're seeing the debate around the waterways coming through very clearly. It couldn't be a more pertinent topic than right now. Neil Edwards, Alison Smedley and myself had a Zoom meeting with Canal and River Trust And we've been engaging with other waterways authorities over the last few weeks in terms of trying to help them define and work through what the least worst situation is and the least worst recommendations. And I see some questions coming through that I'll deal with later in terms of our stance on the towpaths and what should happen during this difficult period. But we need to be looking at all areas of the waterways, and it needs to be about existing waterways, about restoring derelict waterways, but also planned waterways. And again, I believe IWA is particularly relevant there in that we're looking at what is happening on the Milton Keynes Bedford link. We're particularly focused and have invested in ensuring that the evaluation of the Boston to Peterborough link is funded and is collaborative and engaged, and IWA is as engaged in that as we possibly can be. And I'm delighted that David Pullen and Chris Howes as region chairs are directly involved in that project. Now, some folks are asking me, well, IWA was relevant in the past, but how do we continue to maintain our relevance? And in my mind, actually, it's quite easy. And I would encourage everyone to try and interpret the messages and the points that I'm going to make over the next couple of minutes. And I'd be very keen to enter into a really good Q&A and dialogue around these points to make sure that everyone is comfortable with them and really does believe them, because I think this is what is going to help IWA stand out and be as relevant and as useful to everyone else that lies within the waterways. Here I've got another 4 words. And again, these have been reported in the Waterways Press and in Waterways Magazine. But these 4 things, I think, define our relevance and our uniqueness. IWA is independent, and I think that helps establish a flexibility when we're responding to different things that are going on. When we're talking to DEFRA, as we have done over the past couple of weeks, and they're very anxious to get independent insight into what truly is happening in the waterways, IWA is the place that they go to. And so I think that independence, it gives us flexibility, it gives us an objectivity that others may not have. And I'm not casting aspersions on any other organization within the waterways. They are rightly focused on their own constituency, and that is important. But IWA is independent. We also, our heritage is important, our perspective is important, and our diversity is important. And I'm just going to talk about each of these. Now, I've talked about independence and how I believe it's important to be in terms of our heritage is really important from the perspective of our experience. I'm not talking about waterways heritage here. I'm talking about the heritage of IWA as an organization. We've been there, we've done that, we've got the experience, and I think that establishes trust. And I think we should draw on that in terms of how we extrapolate our relevance, both for today and into the future. And I think that that's what gives other people confidence in working with IWA, and it should give all of us confidence in terms of, as IWA members, volunteers, staff team members, officers, friends and supporters of IWA, lovers of the canals, passionate about what it means to live near a canal. That heritage is important. But our perspective is also important. And that perspective operates in 2 main ways. It's the breadth of our perspective. We've got very few blind spots across IWA, and also the timelines that we have to operate to. We don't need to be as focused on quarterly, half-yearly, annual results. Of course, we do want to make a difference in the closest possible timeframes. But there are things that can only be achieved over many, many years. And there are impacts that are coming down the line that we will only see the real impact of those in 20 or 30 years' time. But we need to be tuned into those even today. And linked to that is our diversity. Now, some people laugh when I talk about IWA as being diverse, because yes, we've got a certain age demographic. Perhaps we've got a certain racial demographic. And I think that's true. But actually, we've got an incredible diversity of interests. And I think we should really build on that. And we should make sure that we build on that diversity. Now, we've got a long way to go in terms of being truly diverse. And I hope that we will make sure that we move forward. And some of the objectives that I'll talk about in a moment, I think, reflect that. But it's not just about being relevant today. It is about being relevant tomorrow. But I believe, as I outlined at the beginning, that our founding principles of being an association to campaign for the regeneration of the waterways, those will be good founding principles as we move forward into the next 75 years of IWA. The reason and the uniqueness of IWA's characteristics of being independent, demonstrating that heritage, having that perspective and the diversity will be key. Will be key in that relevance. But I also think it's how we set our objectives. And trustees over the last 6 months have made some very bold decisions and have set their minds very clearly on governing the association, setting the scene to establish our course for the next 75 years. And the objectives themes that we've settled on are these 4. You'll notice that I like things that come in groups of 4. So regeneration, influence, sustainability, and engagement. And I believe that we can interpret almost any of our activities, and we should interpret all of our activities around these 4 objectives, themes. Most of what we're currently doing will fit with these. But let me just break them down in terms of what they might mean. And I would encourage everyone that's on the call tonight, and we've got almost 100 participants on the call tonight, so it's just great to be able to get this message across to such a wide range of people. So regeneration for me means, and I meant it when I said it earlier, restoration will continue to be a major objective area for IWA. But it's not just the only objective under this regeneration banner. Protecting our heritage is crucial. We are losing more heritage from our waterways than we can possibly sustain. We've got to protect that. We've got to work with planners and utilities companies to make sure that planning policy doesn't present, frankly, a grotesque risk to the waterways in the coming couple of decades. We're seeing a lot of development around the environment of the waterways, and only by bringing our experience to bear on that under this title of regeneration, the focus on planning policy, can we address that. Of course, environment is important, but all aspects of that. But just as our founders were looking at the future risk to the waterways, so must we. A constant reevaluation of that risk is something that I know we do, which is maintaining our relevance, but it's something we must constantly do. And we must constantly assess current and future uses of the waterways under this title of regeneration. How are we going to regenerate, rediscover, reform the waterways to make sure that they're just as vital for the future? So when I present these, some folks have asked, well, why isn't campaigning in itself not up there as the overarching objective? And that's because, as I talked about right at the beginning, I believe we should be focusing in on the effect, not the effort. Now, we will have to make a huge amount of effort, and we'll need to gear up our management teams and our volunteering teams, our staff team, to really engage, to deliver campaigning with the view of influencing. We can't just say, oh, we're campaigning, that's great, we're campaigning. The campaign in itself is not the end. That is just the means to influencing, promoting change, and so on. And I also think it's very important to be campaigning, not complaining. There's a lot of negativity around some of the sites on, perhaps on Facebook, where it's just constant complaining. That actually doesn't bring influence. I also think that in order to be very effectively influencing and effectively campaigning, campaigns need to be underpinned by strong consultation and strong research. And I think when we go to government, they expect those facts. Again, over the last couple of weeks, the DEFRA have been so keen to get real deep intelligence about what's going on. And I'm delighted that we've been able to deliver that to them objectively and in a complete way. So our public affairs ability and the capacity there is really strong. We've invested in that in terms of the staff team, and I think we should continue to invest that way. IWA provides the secretariat to the all-party parliamentary group, and I think that positions us right at the heart of government. Of course, inviting in our partners and the other organisations that make up this great Waterways family. And that brings me to the third point of sustainability. Again, this isn't just about environmental sustainability, but it's about the sustainability of the waterways, sustainability of IWA. Again, we've invested and we've got excellent resource, an excellent staff team resource in terms of funding in our finance team, fundraising, really innovative grant application and fundraising campaigns that are happening there. And I think that's important as we move forward. We've also got to make sure that we have organizational resilience. In that regard, I think we've demonstrated that over the last month in a very robust way. We're seeing branch AGMs and branch meetings converted from physical meetings to online meetings, and they're being run very effectively. We had a interim trustees meeting just a couple of weeks ago, again, where all trustees were present on Zoom. It was great to join the WERG pub social evening on Friday night, where we were all sitting, just chatting as much as we would have done if we'd been sitting around a few pints in the pub. And we're also, as the staff team now have geared up very quickly to be able to work from home. We have staff team meetings each week, and I know that there are departmental and group meetings happening almost every day. So we've been very adaptable, and I think that is continuing to prove our resilience and our relevance. And finally, but by no means least, one of the other key areas that I think we should be focusing in on, and I know we are already focusing in on, is how we engage. It's about collaboration, participation, promoting our activities, building a community and coordinating with others. That's what, in my mind, it means to be an association. But it's not just about what we're doing, it's about who we're doing that with. Of course, it's with our members, with our volunteers, our supporters, our staff team, but it's reaching out beyond that to waterways authorities, restoration trusts, any other organisation that shares our passion for the waterways is somebody or they are organizations that we should be engaging with. It goes beyond that, even into making sure we're engaging with the general public and folks that don't share our passion, because we should be making sure that they are well aware of the resource that we have spent the last 75 years delivering to their doorsteps in many cases. And so working with these different groups, I think, is very, very important. So that's really all I wanted to say. And I'm very keen to open things out to questions. If you've got comments, it's more important in my mind that we build on these principles in order to make sure that we continue our relevance. So I'm going to go to the Q&A session now, and we've got 4 questions that are currently still open, but I would encourage you, please, there are no questions that I'm not prepared to take. So please do put them through on the Q&A screen. You can click on that. I think generally at the bottom of your screens, you can open that Q&A. If we've got some time, I might open it out to audio questions. And if we do that, then you'll be able to raise your hand at the bottom of the attendee and participant screen. There's a button that allows you to raise your hand. And so at this point, actually, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that it moves back to me in full screen mode. And so that's. But I'll go to the questions first and foremost. So. First question, what is the IWA position on towpaths remaining open at this time? So a really pressing question, and we're walking a tightrope on that. As I mentioned during the presentation, we had a lengthy conversation with Canal and River Trust just yesterday, and I've been sharing emails and WhatsApp messages with Richard Parry over the last couple of weeks. We're looking for the least worst option, and there is no one-size-fits-all solution. But our general position is that towpaths should remain open, and that people should exercise extreme thoughtfulness and adhere to the government's guidelines and, frankly, the government's instructions around social distancing. In areas where that's not possible, you should not be on the towpaths. And I think it's a case for both boaters and towpath users to be mutually respectful. If you're in a flat in London, you're having to stay in, you might be able to get onto your balcony. It's not a case of sitting out in public areas in your flat. And so therefore, whilst it might be nice and many boaters would like to be sitting out on the towpaths, that's making it therefore very difficult for other towpath users. And I know it's really, really difficult. I have been out on the towpath myself. I live very close to the South Oxford Canal. I'm very fortunate. As I walk down the hill, I've got full sight of the canal. I can see whether there are moored boats, and I know what direction to turn and know how to avoid them. And in most areas, the towpaths are so wide that we can easily pass others with no issues at all. So it's a really difficult area. We're also talking to local authorities and government authorities to press that parks are not closed wherever possible, because where, say for instance, Victoria Park in London has been closed, that has put incredible pressure on the towpaths in that area. But even in London, it's not sufficient to say we're going to close all towpaths, because there are areas like the Regent's around Regent's Park where there generally aren't any moored boats, and the towpaths are very wide. And of course, it's not just walkers. Cyclists, I think, also have to demonstrate a great deal of respect and recognition of other users, because it's not as easy for folks to get out of the way. when a cyclist is coming steaming through. So I saw some posts on Facebook this morning where there were a whole group of quad bikes racing down the towpath. It's just that sort of use is irresponsible. But we'll try where possible to keep them as open as we possibly can. Hopefully that's answered that question, but if there are any other thoughts and comments on that, because again, it's not just my view around this. I'm happy to get thoughts and comments coming through on the chat as well, if you want to share your thoughts with other panelists and so on. What are your reflections on how IWA is seen by other stakeholders? Who are the key groups we need to work on, get them on side, and how do we how should we deprioritize, prioritize those things? So again, really challenging issue. In my book, first and foremost, just get out there and work with whoever you possibly can. Because I believe IWA continues to be relevant, because we're unique, because we've got, we should hold on to that real strength of character and recognize that we have value to add to any other organization, not by being claiming that for ourselves and trying to lord it over any other organization, but being true partners with any other organization and bringing our expertise or our reach and our perspective in whatever way we can. So if an organization is easy to work with them. If it's difficult to work with them, try and understand why it's difficult to work with them. Usually it's a 50-50 thing. Why are we pushing people away? We don't need to be constantly looking over our shoulders and seeing, well, is that canal trust? Is that navigation authority? Is that other charity? And I hear phrases like stealing our members. That's just not really appropriate language. We should be working alongside them. I see that strongly here in the IWA Oxfordshire branch, and particularly in my area just south of Banbury, where IWA members work so closely with the Banbury Canal Partnership. We work closely with Tully's Boatyard. We need to be working with all of these organisations. And as I mentioned, the types of organisations that we should be working with, when I mentioned members, I don't just mean our personal or family members, I mean our corporate and business members as well. We need to reach out to those folks. And one of the things that we're demonstrating our relevance and being appropriate and relevant at this particular time is reaching out to our corporate members, because many of them are suffering really high degrees of hardship. We're representing those viewpoints into DEFRA, and we're working, it's one of the other topics that we picked up with Canal and River Trust yesterday, about how we make sure that the business community doesn't fail during this difficult time. So I believe that in whatever way we possibly can, we should be trying to reach out to anyone who's within our own either personal sphere of interest. So if we're interested in restoration, then just as Restoration Hub does in working with restoration trusts around the country, working with the Canal and River Trust restoration teams, we should be sharing our knowledge and expertise. So work with all of those key stakeholders if you possibly can. So a question around the 2 or 3 most important IWAs since becoming chairman. Difficult one. I think it's been a change in that probably in my introduction I should have obviously emphasized the fact that I am I think the first national chairman who's been fully employed and isn't retired, and that does bring challenges. So I think one of the big changes is that I've appointed 3 deputies. I don't remember a time where there were 3 deputies, and the role of deputy isn't waiting for me to pop my clogs or decide I've had enough. It's a case of rolling up your sleeves and getting on with it. And I'm delighted that Rick Barnes, Chris Howes, and Dave Chapman are really stepping up and helping relieve me of some of the challenges of being national chairman. I also think that whilst I think we've been quite inclusive within IWA in the past, I think we've brought a level of openness. This isn't a case of, in my opening slide, I don't make a big thing about being national chairman. I happen to be national chairman, and I will execute that role with real energy and drive. But first and foremost, I'm an IWA volunteer. I volunteer in WERG. That means taking instructions from camp leaders, doing what I'm told, helping others, being on the marketing committee. I don't chair the marketing committee. I'm a member of it because of the skills that I bring from my business life. And so recognizing that IWA is a very level field, everyone has got value to add in IWA. Everyone's got a role to play, and there is a place for everyone in IWA. And I want to make sure that those messages come through strongly. One of the things that will be coming through more strongly over the coming months is an approach that the trustees decided on at the last trustees meeting, was to focus very strongly in having one management model within IWA. And that means that in many ways, there's no great distinction between the staff team, the volunteer team, officers, and the wider membership. Where we are delivering something that is in line with our objectives, themes, and our charitable objects, then we're working as one team, and we need to see that we're focusing that way. So that's another change that I think will come through, but it's definitely part of the way I think we will split governance from management, because again, the trustees are very clear on the need to be strong on the governance side of things. So it's early days yet. I've been in role for 6 months, and I will be the first to admit, I admitted it right at the outset of this presentation, that my history with IWA is short. I've been involved since 2014, and I've been a boater since 2010. And so I've got a lot to learn from other people. But it's not about how I deliver everything. It's about how we motivate the team and inspire the team to make a difference. Because again, just as when I turned up as a complete novice at Inglesham Lock in July 2014, I wasn't expected to lay coping stones. I wasn't expected to lay bricks. I wasn't expected to know how to safely and securely chop down trees. That's what it's all about, how we work as a team to achieve these great things, rather than expecting people to do things that they don't have the skill sets to do, and making sure that we're sharing the skill sets across the organization. And again, I'm seeing really good examples of that right across the organization today. And we know that it can be done even more effectively. And I'm sure that that will happen in the very near future. I'm conscious that we've got about 15 minutes left, and the questions are lining up. There's a trend for charities merging or being taken over. It seems to be growing to reduce costs. Is this a route that IWA would consider with restoration societies if they reduce delivery scope due to reduced volunteering following COVID? Yeah, I think we need to be looking at that. I think where groups have got resources in their own right, then of course they'll be able to continue. But no one group, no matter how big they are, has got the full set of resources to be able to deliver. And again, that's why WERG is invaluable as a peripatetic group going around the country, assisting when they're invited, and not just in the physical work, but making sure that health and safety policies, our leadership training, our plant training and so on is shared with other groups. And so I think we should be looking again at how we can share resource. And if that means sharing resource between neighbouring canal trusts, and particularly canal trusts who are, and restoration trusts that are essentially working on different ends of the same, or certainly connected areas of the system. But I think an audit of the skills and making sure that we are prepared to share skills across, not just within IWA and the WERG team combined, but we share that more readily across different waterways trusts. And if IWA can play a part in helping those groups link together, then I think we should. But again, I know, Terry, you asked that question, and you've got a lot of experience in your own particular area. So if you think there are needs and reduced capability that's starting to cause problems, and I'd encourage anyone that's involved nationally in canal restoration trusts, if they're starting to become pinch points on the likelihood of restorations continuing, then please flag that up, because as I said, IWA can provide that platform for those difficult decisions to be made. Mentioned a few blind spots in the organisation. What do you see these as, these to be? I think in some areas we're not sharing information enough. So when groups get involved in something, they from time to time are starting from scratch. When actually across the organisation there are teams that are one or two steps further down the line, or actually might have a very robust set of resources and processes or whatever it needs. So when we're campaigning, we shouldn't be starting from scratch. We've got a really solid national team there. Now, not all campaigns are going to be national, but some of the principles are there. So in the same way as WERG has been able to develop and roll out its expertise across the country, so that in marketing, in publicity and promotions, in campaigning, in environmental, heritage, planning policy, and so on, we can bring those real hotspots of expertise to bear right across the organisation. And of course, we're already seeing that in the Bridgewater tidal barrier. We're seeing the local groups in Bridgewater and in the southwest coming together with planning expertise and the staff team and head office to put the most robust and compelling arguments into government. And so we should be recognising that we can do this. We just need to do it more widely. And so having groups that share information, our new website is going to be, I think, really fundamental in this, in terms of dragging, really sharing all that expertise and dragging that knowledge into a shared services resource that we can all be using. We shouldn't be starting from scratch. We should be very, very happy to share our expertise with others. And again, that's what I mean about sustainability and organizational resilience. But I guess if anybody wants to suggest some blind spots that we need to tackle, that's great. We'll get on with that, because it's so important. We can't afford to have any blind spots. Our challenge, the challenge that lies ahead for the next 75 years, is just as strong and demanding as the challenge we faced over the last 75 years. So we've got no excuse for not optimizing our activities and working as one team. So question, talking a lot about influence, what and who were you hoping to influence in this webinar, and who do you think your audience is? Well, I've got a very long list of, at the moment, almost 80 folks, and I know some of the names that are on there. I see a real diversity of people. So in some folks, it's existing IWA members, volunteers, members of our staff team have joined in on this. Folks from canal trusts across the country, great wide range of people. My view is to say that IWA is here, it's open for business. We are a robust team that is delivering across restoration, campaigning, and a great many other things. And so I hope that this message comes out strongly. If it's not about how we just influence tonight, I think it's about how we use this series of webinars, and I'd encourage everyone to join the webinars for in future weeks, so that that wider viewpoint of IWA can come through. So if there are areas that you think we should be, and groupings you think we should be bringing our influence to, that we haven't dealt with tonight, then I really would be keen to hear from you, so that we can address that, because I'm sure I'm not going to be able to influence everyone that's here on the call tonight. How can IWA improve membership numbers, revenue streams, and long-term financial sustainability? Well, I think that's about proving our relevance, making sure that we, to go back to those early definitions of relevance, are pertinent to the moment. And if we are demonstrating our value, then folks will join, I believe, and folks will not just join, but they will participate and they'll get involved in what we're doing. So I think to some extent, with increased membership and engagement, driving those engagement programs, that revenue will increase. But it's important to recognize that IWA's member revenue does not just come from our membership subscriptions. It's coming from grant applications to help us deliver specific activities. It's coming from legacies, and whilst that's often a very difficult topic to address, when I look at what we've achieved as an organization in the use of the legacies that we've received over many, many years, it would be remiss of me not to mention the value of legacies to everyone that's on this call tonight. And I'd urge you to seriously think about how you can support IWA in the form of legacies, because it is important, and we have a lot of what we've achieved, particularly in restoration, but across many other areas, not just nationally. There are legacies that have been focused in on specific branch and region activities, and I think that's important as well. Long-term financial sustainability, we are in a good position in terms of financial sustainability. We've reviewed the current situation in terms of the impact on the staff team, and we are not going to furlough any staff. We believe we have just a strong an activity program, and we can continue to support our members. We can prepare for when we can get back to physical operations. So on things like investing more and focusing more on the website, making sure that our mailing lists and our ability to reach out is just as strong, to make sure that our fundraising capability is still as active as it's ever been. Those are activities that we need to continue with. Frankly, we need to deal with even more. And of course, next week's, I think as Alice has just put out on the chat, next week's webinar from Jeff Wood and Mick Butler, talking about the huge amount of work's been done on the Northampton arm. Some of that work has really it's been led by the financial sustainability and the ability to support branch activities. I'm sure there's more we need to do, and again, if anybody's got ideas about how we can drive forward membership numbers, it's not about what I do, it's not about what the staff team does, it's about what we all do as members, officers, volunteers, joining and getting involved in the wider activity. So I think four more questions I'm going to try and deal with really quickly. Protecting heritage, but some areas, the number of active IWA team members is rather too small to be effective, and other campaigning groups have sprung up to fill the gap. Actually, I don't have any problem with that. If other groups are going to pick up, then we need to look at not how do we do it directly within our own volunteers, membership, or staff team. We need to look at how we sustain and get behind those other groups and celebrate what they're doing, ask them what support they need, and get involved. This is not a mutually exclusive activity. IWA members can get directly involved in those groups, and we shouldn't be. We shouldn't worry about getting involved in local canal trusts, heritage groups, restoration groups. We can have our we can get involved in all of those. So get involved and support anyone else that's actively protecting heritage, and make sure IWA is part of that. You will be our representatives on those groups, and make sure the IWA's voice is heard, but also that those groups understand the reach that IWA can have, whether it's in the planning authorities, utilities, local authorities, national government. Another question around seeing any relevance to using IWA to promote good health and mental health by partnering with charities and organizations in those fields. I think that's very important. It's particularly important at this time. When it was beginning to look like some of our branch meetings and branch AGMs might be just cancelled and not picked up till the end of this program, I felt it was very, very important to ensure that we're reaching out to our branch members, not just to purely continue the work of IWA around specific deliverables, but to actually recognise that we are an association, we are a community, and we need to care for each other during this time. Many of our members are vulnerable. They're, because of the age demographic of our group, we need to be reaching out to anyone that's around the IWA family that needs our help right now. So I would encourage you to use IWA, use the facilities that we've got to run Zoom calls. If anyone wants to have anything like that set up for them, we've invested in a very robust Zoom capability, and we will help organize branches, regional groups, and so on, help engage with folks around you within the community. So good health, mental health, it's one of the reasons we are wanting to see the towpaths continue to be open, so that we can still exercise and have an outlet for good mental health. So let's keep talking. So a question from someone's new to IWA, having just joined, interested to know what the vision is for the future uses of canals over the next 75 years. Does this drive the response to change that you have in mind? And I think, yes, if we are constantly sensing what the future risks to the waterways will be and what the future uses of the waterways will be, and constantly be responsive, I think that will drive that vision. But our vision is clear. Our vision doesn't change. We want to see the waterways offer the maximum that they possibly can to all users. So it's very difficult to predict out 75 years, where we'll probably struggle. 4 months ago, we would have struggled to predict where we are right now. But it's part of that perspective. By drawing people in from the wide diversity of IWA, we stand a better chance of predicting how the future will lie. And so, again, ideas about how you would like to get involved and how you can exercise your particular interest, because it's not just about any one particular interest or nationally constrained objectives. We want to see those objectives being able to be interpreted, still driving towards the organization's charitable objects, but interpreted in a way that our branches, our volunteers, our supporters in the widest sense can get behind. So any ideas you've got, any thoughts you've got on the future of the waterways, then let us know, because we are determined to set the course for that next 75 years. So just as we wrap up, because I'm conscious of time, and I'm delighted that everyone has been keen to stay on to the end of this session. So the last question is, can we get access to your slide set to share with others? And yes, we will make this slide set available. And if I do get time, perhaps over the Easter weekend, or it may take me a little bit longer, I'll put a little bit more descriptive text behind some of this. But what I would say is this session has been recorded, so that's probably the best way to disseminate that. But if you want to share them with others with your own message attached to them, understanding the broad principles of what I've been covering tonight, then this isn't just about how I can run a webinar like this and speak to 80 odd people who are here tonight. It's about how every single one of you take up this message, make it your own, make it relevant for the group that you're directly involved in, because I think that will be the best way to get this message through. We're all in this together. It's the multiplier effect and the advocacy that our members and our supporters and our volunteers bring that helps us go a long way in achieving the charity's objectives. And I really thank you for being part of that. Your contribution to IWA is what makes it relevant today, and it is what will make it relevant going into the future. So thank you for being IWA. Thank you for how you add to everything that IWA does. And all I really want to say now is please stay safe, keep well, and spend some time with the people who are around you, the people you love, and continue, if you can, to support everything that IWA is doing. Thank you for joining us tonight. Good night.